In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to edit the In the Box project. Looks something like this. All right, so the first thing you need to do obviously is take your photos, put them into Lightroom, and then export a copy onto your device. Once you've done that, you're going to go ahead and download the In the Box template that should be in Teams. It's a Photoshop file, and open it up in Photoshop. It's going to look just like the one you see here on the screen. So we've got a white background, and then I've also placed on here for you some grid lines, which are basically just guides. These will not affect your photo, your final image in any way, but they will help you to place your pictures basically in the right section so that everything lines up correctly. So once you've got your template open, we're actually going to go back up to File, Open, and we're going to open your images. So I have my In the Box images saved to my computer. I've exported them from Lightroom. I'm actually going to click on the first one, hold down Shift, and I'm going to open all 9 of them. Now they're all going to open up in different tabs, so you can see them loading here on the screen. And one by one, we're going to make selections, layer masks, and then place them into the template. So it's going to look something like this. Let's go ahead and start on the first one. Now, I am going to be using the polygonal lasso tool because the boxes we use are not perfect squares. They're not even perfect rectangles, right? They have kind of odd edges. So they're all still straight lines though. So I'm going to be using this tool. If you were using a box that was perfectly rectangular or square, you could totally use the rectangular marquee tool. Otherwise, this is going to be great. So I'm going to go ahead and start on the edge of the box by clicking. Oh, let's make sure we're on the right tool though. By clicking. And I'm just going to drag across, and at every corner I'm going to click. And I'm going to do my best not to include anything in the background. I'd rather trim off a little bit of the box than to include something I don't need. So notice I'm just kind of going to each corner, clicking, clicking, clicking. And then once I get back to where I started, double click. And that should make a selection. Now we want to keep what's in the selection and hide what's not in the selection without permanently deleting it just in case. So I'm going to then make a layer mask, which should remove my background. From there, you could either copy and paste this layer over, but I'm actually going to drag this layer. So I'm clicking, holding, and dragging. I'm going to go over to my In the Box template, and I'm going to let go once I'm hovering over. Now the picture is going to come out really big at first. So we're going to put it into Free Transform, which is Control key T on your keyboard. And I'm going to grab a corner and just start to shrink it down a little bit. Now you should have in your proposal a plan of where each of your photos are going to go. So make sure that's where you're placing it. So my plan is to place this at the very top middle box. Okay, now keep in mind, like I said earlier, because this box is not perfectly rectangular, it's not going to fit in here perfectly. We're going to have to do a little bit of adjusting. But I'm going to do my best to mostly fit this in, maybe with a little bit of white gaps. Here, you can see here it doesn't fit perfectly. Okay, but that's a really good start. Now, while it's still in Free Transform, I'm going to zoom in here so you can see. I'm actually going to right-click inside the picture while it's still in Free Transform, and I'm going to choose Skew. Some of these other options might work for you too, but I find Skew to be one of the most flexible ones when it comes to adjusting the edges. So by taking this top left corner, I can kind of pull the edge of the box so that it fits along my guideline. And I can do that here with the top right corner. Okay, and again, down here, bottom left, and get it to fit to the best of my ability. All right, you might have to do a little back and forth. And you can also right click again, go back to scale. If it's a little bit too big, we can go ahead and bring it in a bit. Okay, now we'd rather have the box stick out of the grid lines into another space than to have a big white blank area. So I'm actually gonna move this down a little bit. Go back to Skew, and then just make a couple more adjustments. Oops, not rotate, Skew. Skew. And then with my left and right arrows on my keyboard, I'm just going to make a couple adjustments. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now I can always go back and make further adjustments if needed, but I like that, so I'm going to go ahead and set it in. Okay, now that's pretty much it. Let's go ahead and do another one together So I'm going to go back. This is one I already did. I'm going to exit out of this tab. And I'm not going to save these because it was a really easy mask to make. So I'm just going to put no, and I'm going to go to my next one. Now, I didn't do this in any of my images, but if you have anything that is hanging outside of the box, maybe you had a person's arm sticking outside of the box, maybe a prop is sticking outside of the box, make sure that when you're making a selection that you include that. Now, as you can see here, I'm going to do the same thing I did earlier, where I'm just going to take the polygonal lasso tool and just go around a few times, right, clicking at every corner. Now, this is actually a good way to start, so I'm going to double click here. If I had an arm or again something sticking out, I would go to maybe another selection tool like the quick selection tool. In my options, I would go to add to selection, and I would maybe adjust my brush size, and then I would add to the selection whatever I needed that was sticking out of the box. Again, maybe you have an arm or a prop or something, so make sure that you include that if that's part of your image. Then add a layer mask when you're ready, and same steps. We're going to drag and drop it into the template and just make sure that you know where you're putting it. So again, we're going to resize, Control T, bring this in a bit. This is going to go in my top left-hand corner because that was my plan. And you can see how it's starting to fit in. Now I know we have some white gaps here where the corners are not really a corner. So we will get to that part in just a little bit. Let's go ahead and right click and skew and get this box to fit a little bit more evenly. Okay, now as you keep working, it's going to look something like this. I'm going to go ahead and fit my very last image, which is actually one of these. This one. Okay, so we're going to do this one more time together in case you missed any of the steps. So select your box, polygonal lasso tool, make sure that you add to a selection if you have anything sticking out of the box. Layer mask. All right, drag and drop it over. This time I'm going to go into this one where I'm almost finished. Control T. Now, if you can't see your box, just zoom out. It's a big image. Let's go ahead and move it into the center and make sure that it fits correctly. Okay, so that's probably the most time-consuming part, is just to skew, resize, and make sure that these fit without having like a white gap here. And like I said, we're going to fill in some of the white gaps that we see, but we want to get rid of as many as possible. I'm going to go back to scale and just shrink that down a little bit more, and then go back to skew. So maybe a lot of back and forth to get this to fit right. Okay. All right, once I like it and it looks something like this, we are almost done. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to fill in that white space because I don't want to see the background. So I could, at this point, if the grid lines were bothering me, I could come up to the view option, go down to guides, and just clear the guides. That way those lines aren't distracting me. If you keep them there though, in no way will they affect your image. So I'm going to click on the background in my layers panel, and I'm going to be adding in from my adjustments a solid color. All right, now you should get a color picker box that pops up. And what we can do is we can choose a color from the box. Now, obviously the box is going to have a lot of different colors based on, or values based on the lighting, but I'm going to pick a color that I think blends in the most. So I'm just kind of clicking and dragging along the box. I think the dark stands out too much. Maybe something kind of medium. Okay, so not perfect, but it definitely is not so much a distraction. We're definitely getting the in the box effect. So I'm going to go ahead and press OK. And that's really it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to come up to File. We're going to save this as a Photoshop file. So let's go onto our computer and into OneDrive. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. So it should be your full name dash in the box, and make sure Photoshop file. Once it's saved as a Photoshop file, we're now going to export it as a JPEG. So File, Export, Quick Export as JPEG. Same name, same place, so back to OneDrive, same name, now it's a JPEG. Perfect. Okay, but we are not done quite yet. Our final edits should be in Lightroom. Now keep in mind, this is something I did miss a little bit earlier, that So my only picture that looks a little bit different when it comes to exposure is this one here that's on the very bottom. So what I should have done before I did all my saving and exporting is I should go to that layer. So let me go ahead and click on that layer. And I probably should add an adjustment to brighten that picture up because I feel like it's the one picture that doesn't quite match the rest. So I'm going to go to brighten its contrast. Now, if I just start moving the sliders around, it's going to affect any layer that's underneath it. So I want to make sure that I select my clipping mask, and now it's just going to affect that one singular layer. So I can do any sort of adjustment, but I think brightness and contrast, or possibly exposure. The same idea. Make sure you add a clipping mask, and then we can make, oh yeah, exposure looks a lot better. That way it looks a little bit more even. So I'm going to go File, Save again, make sure that my Photoshop file saves. And I'm going to actually export that one more time and replace the one I did earlier, now that they match. So I'm just going to hit Save again and replace. Okay, now we're actually going to put this back into Lightroom. So here's the album I have with all my singular images. So I'm actually going to go to Add Photos. We're going to browse our device, and we're going to find where we saved that into OneDrive. Make sure that you add in the JPEG file. There we go. All right, and so now it's time for our final edit. Okay, and this part's totally up to you. So now that the exposure is even, we can do manual edits if you'd like to just make some adjustments to the whole image, or if you want to do something a little bit more fun, you can find a preset that you like. You can be subtle, it can be strong. That actually looked really cool. But just make sure that whatever edits you choose, that it's not making it difficult to see your subjects. I find that this one is a little bit difficult to see, but if I like it, I can select it. I could choose how much of that edit I actually want to apply here. I can also go into my editing panel, and I could always adjust, because what's darkening up the edges is actually my vignette, and I could adjust how much vignette there is. So I actually like the contrast that that edit brings without so much of covering the edges. Okay, so that's basically it. So find an edit you like, and then we're going to do one final export. So now that we've chosen our edit, I'm going to right click on the image. We're going to export one photo. All right, we're going to make sure that it has the same name it did when we saved it in Photoshop. So your name dash in the box. Number should be set to 1. All right, export. Okay, you can export to OneDrive, or in this case, we usually in Lightroom export to our saved photos folder. Let's go ahead and select that folder, and we're done.